Yo, what's up guys? Another video on actual crit rate. So there's been a bunch of more testing, there's been a bunch of questions, there's been a bunch of answers and that kind of stuff. So I want to talk about some things that I tested, some things that I heard, but mostly some things that I tested. But firstly, let's talk about the actual formula. So the formula, let's call like the actual crit rate ACR. So let's call it ACR from now on just to make it easier, ACR. So it is crit rate plus crit rate in brackets minus crit rate times crit rate. What it actually means, to break it down like really simple, you are just doing your crit rate check twice. If you throw two coins of 50% and that one or the other, so it's an or check for the math people or like the computing people out there, it's an or check. So if one is 50% or the other is 50%, together it's 75%. So it's an or check. That's literally what this is. So it's checking it twice. Therefore, I think this is some kind of spaghetti code mistake of having a certain check performed twice. And I've seen some people that have sent tickets about this to Contours. They got a response that it is not a mistake, that is working as intended, but they will send it to the developer. So I'm not sure if we're gonna get anything out of that right there. Maybe we'll see in the next patch notes or whatever. But it is like me as a software engineering student. I've been working with software engineering, coding, and that kind of stuff for what, like the last 9 to 10 years, either for school, jobs, home projects, whatnot. Having a check performed twice by mistake is something that does happen from time to time. It is a common bug. So that's what I think it is, a bug. But it's in there for the longest time, but it actually works weirder than expected. So we already talked that if you have a multi-hitter, only the first hit actually counts. So for example, my Juno was not on 75 ACR while being on 50 crit rate because only her first hit has 75 ACR and her second and her third hit do not have it. So you have 75 plus 50% plus 50% is actually the 58.3 something, which actually corresponds with the results that I got in there. So that's first of all. That makes sense. We already knew that for the multi-hits. But there's some few others. The other thing is, what if you AoE hit this whole defense? Will all of them actually hit? Let's say my Pheromos is 50 CR. Will he become 75 ACR? And will he become 75 ACR for all units? That's what I actually checked in the following thing. So as you can see here, and that's also something that someone said in the comments, and that's absolutely true, everything probability is based on sample size. The bigger the sample size, the more likely you are to the actual probability rate. It might be off here and there a bit. It might not actually be the true number, or above it, some below it, I don't know. But these are the numbers that I got from my testing. So I used my Pheromos to hit this defense 100 times. I went 100 times on this defense, and I've been hitting the third unit every single time to check how many times do I crit on each one of those. We don't have a sample size of 1,000,000 here, would be nice, but getting a sample size of 100 is already a pain in the butt. I did this twice. So I went over with my Pheromos. I kept repeating the battle, going in, hitting AoE on the whole team, going out, repeat, check all the crit rates, that kind of stuff. It is actually pain in the butt to do. So I wrote it down like this: ones are for crits, zeros are for non-crits. And I right away started doing, I clicked on the third unit every single time. So in this case, I was clicking on the Shannon every time. And the interesting thing is, the number above is actually the crit rate. So you can see that I critted on the Shannon more often because I clicked on the Shannon. So therefore I came to the conclusion, if you click on a unit, you have the ACR rather than the CR. So that means the unit you click on, you have the double check of a crit rate rather than the other units spread out, which is a really important thing to know if you're like Zyros cleaving, or any unit that like AoE, even like Savannas or, well, Changpang, Okeanos, it matters less because they have like more AoE spread hits. But if you're like AoE cleaving and that kind of stuff, your unit does not have 100 crit rate. This is really important to know. But then again, can you go from one set of data and like pull the conclusion that hey, this is ACR only on the unit that you tested? So I did this twice. So the actual crit rate average of all of them was 55, which is a bit higher than 50, but can happen, sample size. And then on the main target, it was 68. Let's pull out the other data set where I actually was hitting the first unit all the time. So now I added the data of hitting the first unit all the time. And as you can see, some of them I hit a little bit more than 50, some a little bit less than 50. Again, it's just 100 rounds, so it goes all the way down to 100. This Excel's freaking flashy. Whatever, you get the point. So as you can see, I had 78% crit rate on the unit that was actually targeting, because I was targeting the Pheromos in this case. So the unit you target has the ACR on his ass, and the other units have the normal CR on his ass. So that's an interesting thing to know. I haven't seen this posted yet, so this is, I think, a new one for us, but it also makes more sense that this is kind of more a bug than a spaghetti code kind of thing. So let's talk about a few other things I've also seen in the comments and what people had questions about. One thing was team ups. So people were discussing like, okay, let's say, would that make it easier to, for example, make a GB12 team? And the answer is no. This will not make it easier for a GB12 team, because only the first hit out of every hit is likely to have the ACR. I didn't test it with team-ups because it's really a pain in the ass to test with team-ups because there's way too much text. I tried it a little bit, but it's just really difficult. But from my assumption, based on like other data and how things work, I think only the first hit has the ACR. All of the other hits, including team-ups, including revenge. So also that is what someone tested actually. A revenge of an Artemil or a Leica or any unit on revenge does not have ACR, it has CR. So therefore team-ups, I do not expect to have ACR except for the very first hit, and therefore Tricars are not easier to make with crit rate. So another question I've seen a bunch of times that was not really a conclusive answer to: does elemental advantage get put into the formula or after the formula the moment ACR actually happens? With the assumption that elemental advantage is put after the formula, you get a formula which looks as following. So you got the whole formula plus 15%. That means the moment you hit within the formula 85%, you are technically at 100. The moment where that happens is 62 makes 85 ACR and therefore 100 CR. Therefore, Pheromos on 62 CR should have 100 ACR with elemental advantage. Or option 2, it is within the formula, and then the formula is simply you put the CR plus the 15% and you put that in the formula to get the ACR, and therefore your 62 becomes actually 72 CR, and therefore your ACR is 94.7%. In other words, is 62 crit rate 100% crit rate with elemental advantage and ACR, or is actually 100 crit rate 100 crit rate, whether it's ACR, elemental advantage, or nothing? Let's say you're 84 crit rate with plus 15, you're at 99, you're still at like 99.999 something crit rate, and you're actually only at 100 when you're actually at 100. And I think that second one does make more sense. So I went testing. So I was testing if something is pretty much 95 crit rate or 100. And trust me, that's actually more pain in the ass because you're doing on elemental advantage, so you have crushing hit. So you don't always read critical hit. Sometimes you read crushing hit, and it almost reads the same, which was a pain in the ass. But here is the answer. The answer is that I was actually critting for 95% of the time out of about 100 hits. The answer is option 2. Your elemental advantage is within the formula. And therefore, otherwise it would be really simple. Otherwise your Kali would have been 49 crit rate, elemental advantage. No, wait, probably even less. You could go for a Kali that's like super low crit rate, always crit on Triana. Probably like with lead elemental advantage, blah, blah, blah. You could go like for a 40 something Kali and always crit. That is not the case. So that one, it is option 2, it's within the formula. Then another question, does it also apply for Violent or for Despair? Well, you see the results here. I did a Colleen versus Colleen Vio fight. It's a boring fight to watch, but it was like 23% 23% violent and 20% violent, which is both pretty equal. And then I went for a Despair versus a Despair Colleen, which is again a really stupid fight, which was 27 and 27. something that I did notice, which was kind of weird, is you see a lot of zeros here, right? And then later on you see a lot of ones, which is like, ooh, time gate, time gate, time gate. Ah, man, I don't know, but that was kind of odd to see. And then again, it's sample size, so like on average, yes, but within like sometimes it was just despair, 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 and the other time was like nothing at all, which is, no, make of that what you want. Maybe I'm just searching for patterns that are not there. I don't know. Another comment I got like a bunch of times, like, oh, you should definitely lower your crit rate, because if you lower your crit rate by 6, you can add in like 8 extra HP, defense, or attack, and therefore also grind it with another 10. So you're talking about 18 extra stats compared to 6 crit rate, which does sound kind of making sense, but also not really, because it's not a straight transition from one to one that you can trade one for the other and also grind it. For example, like let's say in a slot 2 with speed, yes, you can have all of the other 3 stats, which makes sense, but you can only have 3, so you can have attack, speed, or you can have attack, defense, and HP. But the other grindable is speed, but speed is already in there. So that actually only works for slot 4, crit damage, and then accuracy slot 6, resistance slot 6, because otherwise the grindable stats, unless you want to go flat stats, technically speed is flat stat, but whatever. If you want to go all 4 flat stats on every rune, that is not possible. Simply because slot 1 cannot have defense, slot 3 cannot have attack, slot 5, yes, can have everything. So slot 5, yes, it does make sense to not have crit rate on a slot 5. But then on your slot 2, you have 3 other stats besides speed or attack probably, and then there you can have crit rate or accuracy or anything like that. And then in your slot 3 you can have, yes, speed, HP, defense, and then your 4th slot you cannot trade that crit rate for HP. So people were saying like, oh, you should just lower like 12 crit rate and you can trade 12 crit rate for 16 HP. Technically maybe, but you cannot say that one-to-one that it always works. Also, you gotta work with the runes you have, not the runes that you want. Or in general, why are people running lower crit rate? Because they don't have runes that have those crit rates available. So that's kind of, you gotta use with what you have. And yes, definitely you can lower some stats, up some crit rate for some units, but again, if you miss a crit, you might instantly lose a match. Keep that in mind. Whatever you do with that, that's totally up to you. I'm not gonna say here, this is how you should play your game. Like with all of my videos, I'm not saying this is how you should play your game. This is just me saying what I recommend people to do, and whether other people agree or disagree, that's completely fine. So that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. Also, if there are still more questions, put them in the comments down below. Also, if you have other findings that are not mentioned here or not mentioned anywhere, or they are maybe mentioned anywhere but I didn't mention them, put them in the comments as well. I might make a part 3 if there is enough content to make this interesting. I think I answered most of the important stuff already, but hey, you don't know what you don't know. There might be more out there, and hope this was informative. And guys, thanks for watching. See you in the next one.